When 17-year-old Imani Rivers quietly walked into the front doors of Brooklyn High, all she wanted was to survive her senior year unnoticed. But her calm presence, and the fact that she was the only black girl in a mostly white school, made her an instant target. Ashley Mitchell, the icy queen bee of the school, saw Imani's silence not as strength, but as weakness. What began with whispers and spilled juice soon escalated into a full-blown campaign of public humiliation, fueled by a clique of wealthy bullies and a football star brother. What Ashley didn't know. Imani was trained by her father, a former pro fighter, in martial arts and emotional discipline. The real turning point. A planned showdown behind the gym where Imani had to choose, stay silent or defend herself in front of the entire school. What happened next left the whole campus speechless. Stay with us to the end, and don't forget to like, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. The yellow school bus came to a loud, hissing stop in front of Brooklyn High, its doors creaking open as students poured out in groups, laughing, shouting, some still scrolling through their phones. Amidst the noise and chaos, Imani Rivers stepped down last, her red hoodie pulled snug over her braids, her backpack clutched tightly against her back. She didn't speak to anyone. Didn't make eye contact. Her heart beat steady but low, like the quiet before a storm. This was Imani's 6th school in 4 years. She had grown used to the shifting of cities, classrooms, and names on attendance sheets. She knew how to disappear into the crowd, how to avoid making waves. Her father, Marcus Rivers, had always told her, "You don't have to prove anything to anyone, just know who you are." That mantra had kept her grounded through every hallway she'd ever walked. And now, stepping into Brooklyn High, she hoped, desperately, that it would work here too. But something was different. Even as she passed rows of blue lockers and loud, joking students, Imani could feel the shift in energy. Her skin prickled. Conversations dropped slightly in volume as she passed. She didn't need a mirror to know what they saw, a new girl, quiet, confident in her silence, and, unmistakably, black in a school where she could count the other black students on one hand. She found her locker, hands slightly shaking as she entered the combination. But before she could even memorize the numbers, a hush fell over the hallway. Footsteps echoed with deliberate rhythm behind her, and instinct told her someone was approaching with purpose. She didn't turn around, not right away. But she didn't have to. The air changed when Ashley Mitchell entered a space. Ashley was tall, blonde, and always dressed like she was walking into a country club rather than a public high school. Her high-end Burberry skirt, manicured nails, and perfect posture screamed control. And flanking her like clockwork were Brianna, red-haired, sharp-tongued, and Courtney, quiet but always watching. Behind them, as always, loomed Zach Mitchell, Ashley's older brother and the school's prized quarterback. He wore his jersey like a crown, and when he wasn't smirking, he was sizing people up like they were opponents on the field. Close by was Luke Rodriguez, tall and wiry, known for pulling stunts that towed the line between prank and cruelty. Ashley paused just behind Imani, her arms crossed, an eyebrow slightly raised. "New girl," she said, not loudly, but with a tone that carried. Imani kept her eyes on the inside of her locker, pretending not to hear. The silence that followed was heavier than words. Then came the whispering. Not from Ashley, but from the students nearby, those waiting for a show. Imani closed her locker calmly, slung her backpack over one shoulder, and walked away without a word. But inside, a familiar knot was forming in her chest. She had seen girls like Ashley before, ones who ruled schools not with kindness or merit, but fear. And it was clear that Ashley had just chosen her as the next performance piece in her kingdom. The first class passed with the usual new kid awkwardness. Imani found a spot in the back corner, close to the window, where she could observe without being seen. She didn't speak unless called on. She kept her answers short, precise. Still, she could feel Ashley's gaze from across the room. Calculating. Measuring. Like a predator eyeing prey. During break, the whispers got louder. Chicago, huh? Bet she thinks she's tough. She walks like she's better than everyone. Did you see her shoes? Definitely not from around here. Imani ignored it. Or at least she tried. She had trained her body and mind in her father's gym for as long as she could remember: Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu, boxing. Not to fight, but to focus. Her father didn't raise her to respond to every provocation. He raised her to breathe, to observe, and only act when necessary. But Ashley wasn't letting up. By lunchtime, her plan had shifted from whispers to spectacle. Imani took her tray and found a table in the back of the cafeteria, the table no one wanted because it was farthest from the center. Perfect. But just minutes later, she heard the unmistakable click of expensive heels approaching. Ashley, with her designer water bottle in one hand and a full cup of red fruit punch in the other, was smiling as she walked toward Imani. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, not waiting for an answer. Then, with exaggerated surprise, she accidentally tipped the entire cup of punch across Imani's tray and onto her lap. Gasps, then laughter. Phones raised. The students who had once ignored Imani were now waiting to see if she would cry, scream, or lash out. But Imani did none of that. She calmly stood, wiped her hands on a napkin, picked up the ruined tray, and walked it to the trash. Her face was unreadable. When she returned, she grabbed her bag and left the cafeteria in total silence. The room, once loud with jeers, had gone strangely quiet. Students exchanged looks, not of amusement, but confusion. Why hadn't she cracked? Ashley watched her leave with narrowed eyes. Something didn't sit right. She was used to breaking people down. But Imani hadn't even blinked. That wasn't weakness. That was something else. That night, Imani sat on the living room couch, staring at nothing, a storm churning quietly behind her eyes. Her father walked in from the gym, the scent of sweat and eucalyptus trailing behind him. He knew the look on her face without needing to ask. He sat beside her and waited. Finally, Imani spoke. "She wants to break me." Marcus leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Then don't let her." "She won't stop," Imani whispered. "They never do. Not until I react." "Then react," he said calmly. "But do it your way. Not theirs." "I don't want to hurt anyone, Dad." Marcus turned and looked her square in the eye. "Hurt? No. But you defend. You protect your peace. You control the storm. You don't run from it." The next morning, Imani arrived to find a note taped to her locker. The handwriting was unmistakably Ashley's. "After school. Behind the gym. Don't chicken out." The challenge was clear. She could ignore it and be labeled a coward forever, or face it and finally end the game. When Ashley approached her in the hallway, flanked by her usual crew, she smirked. "I hope you show up, Imani. I'd hate to think you're just another fake tough girl." Imani looked her in the eye. "I'll be there." The hallway fell into stunned silence. Ashley's smirk faltered for the briefest moment. By 3:30 p.m., a crowd had formed behind the gym. Whispers ran wild. Phones were out. Ashley stood tall in the center, surrounded by Brianna, Courtney, Zach, and Luke. Imani arrived alone. Ashley stepped forward, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "You should have stayed home." But Imani didn't respond. Her face was calm, her stance loose but firm. When Zach stepped in, trying to intimidate her, she sidestepped him effortlessly and sent him to the ground in one fluid motion. Gasps filled the air. Luke rushed next. Same result, down in seconds, his arm pinned painfully behind him before she let go. Ashley's face turned pale. And when she lunged forward in a final desperate act, Imani caught her, spun her, and held her in place, then whispered in her ear, "You were never strong. You just made others afraid." Then she let her go. Ashley stood frozen. The crowd silent. No more laughter. No more whispers. Imani picked up her bag and walked away. But the story wasn't over. The next day, the school had changed. Ashley sat alone. The fear and control she once ruled with had crumbled. Imani didn't take her place, she didn't need to. She just wanted peace. And in choosing dignity over revenge, strength over aggression, Imani Rivers gave Brooklyn High a lesson no one would forget. True power doesn't come from control, it comes from knowing exactly who you are, and standing firm in it. Stay with us to see how this unforgettable story unfolds. Hit subscribe, leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't miss the next chapter of Imani's journey. The morning after the confrontation behind the gym, Imani Rivers stepped through the double doors of Brooklyn High with her head held high. The usual noise in the hallway faded as students turned to look at her, their whispers now laced with awe rather than ridicule. She didn't need to guess what they were talking about, every moment from the day before had already traveled down every hallway, through every phone, and into every conversation. But Imani didn't revel in it. She didn't walk with swagger or stare anyone down. She simply moved the way she always did, calm, purposeful, and silent. Because for her, yesterday wasn't a victory. It was a necessity. Ashley Mitchell, on the other hand, hadn't shown up for first period. Her absence was louder than words. The girl who once strutted through the hallways like she owned every tile and locker had suddenly vanished into the background. Her power had always depended on image, on control, on fear. And all of it had shattered the moment Imani had shown she couldn't be broken. In the cafeteria during lunch, the tables had rearranged themselves socially, if not physically. Ashley, who once claimed the prime seat at the center, now sat off to the side, alone. Brianna and Courtney still showed up, but they didn't sit beside her. Instead, they wandered aimlessly from table to table, clearly uncomfortable, their loyalty shaken. Meanwhile, Imani took her usual spot in the back corner of the cafeteria. A few students passed by and gave her subtle nods or respectful glances. Some even whispered, "Thanks," as they walked past. But she didn't engage in any of it. She wasn't interested in building a following or replacing Ashley as the new center of attention. She just wanted to eat in peace. Still, the shift was undeniable. The students had seen strength, not loud, boastful strength, but quiet, unshakable confidence. It had made an impression. For the first time, many of them began to question why they had followed Ashley so blindly for so long. Why had they laughed when she mocked others? Why had they stayed silent? The answer was uncomfortable. But seeing Imani challenge the system without ever throwing a punch in anger forced everyone to reflect. Ashley returned to school on Wednesday. Her makeup was lighter. Her clothes less polished. She kept her eyes on the floor and moved quickly from class to class. Gone were the arrogant pauses, the cold stares, the performative smiles. She had become what she once ridiculed, just another student trying not to be noticed. During gym class that afternoon, Coach Bennett called for a team relay exercise. The students gathered on the field, pairing up for the running drills. Imani, as usual, stayed near the edge, stretching quietly. When the teams were announced, a hush fell over the group. Coach had paired Imani with Ashley. The silence was thick as they stood side by side, both pretending not to notice each other. Coach barked instructions, but neither girl spoke. When the whistle blew, Imani took off like she always did, measured, smooth, fast. She passed the baton to Ashley with a neutral expression. Ashley hesitated for a split second, then ran. Her form wasn't as sharp, her speed not as practiced, but she pushed herself hard. Harder than anyone had seen her try before. They didn't win. But no one cared. As they caught their breath afterward, Ashley sat on the edge of the field, sweat streaking her forehead. She looked over at Imani, who stood sipping water by the fence. "I didn't expect you to show up that day," Ashley said quietly, just loud enough for Imani to hear. Imani didn't turn. You expected a lot of things that didn't happen. Ashley gave a small, bitter laugh. Yeah. I did. There was a pause. I wasn't always like that, Ashley said after a moment. But this school, you either control it, or it controls you. At least, that's what I believed. Imani finally turned to face her. Her eyes were steady. And now? Ashley looked away. Now I'm not sure I believe anything. The conversation ended there. Imani didn't reply. She didn't need to. Ashley wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was just trying to make sense of the cracks in her once perfect image. Over the next week, things continued to shift. Some students began sitting with Imani at lunch. Not many, just a few brave ones. A sophomore named Jasmine who had once been the target of Ashley's jokes. A junior named Devin who had kept quiet during the cafeteria incident but couldn't stop replaying it in his mind. They sat with her not because she was popular, but because she was safe, someone who had stood up without asking anyone to follow her. Imani didn't encourage or discourage it. She simply accepted their presence, sometimes offering a half smile or nodding when they spoke. She was still quiet, still private. But now she wasn't alone. One afternoon, after school, Imani stopped by her father's gym. The place smelled of leather and sweat, with the rhythmic thud of gloves hitting bags echoing through the space. Marcus was in the ring with a younger fighter, correcting his stance. When he saw Imani, he waved the kid off and walked over. "You okay?" She nodded. "Things are different." "Good different or bad different?" "I don't know yet." Marcus studied her. "They looking at you differently now?" She nodded again. "You didn't do this to become popular, Imani. You stood up because you had to." "I know," she said softly. "But now they expect something. Like I'm supposed to lead or be a symbol or something." Marcus smiled gently. "You don't owe anyone a show. Let them learn from your actions. If you keep being who you are, that's enough." Imani took a deep breath. "Ashley talked to me." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Really? She's not who I thought she was. Or maybe, she is. Just scared. People who need control are often the ones who feel most out of control inside," he said. "Doesn't excuse it. But it helps you understand it." That night, Imani sat on her porch, watching the sun dip below the rooftops. She thought about everything that had happened over the past few weeks, the whispers, the confrontation, the silence that followed. She didn't feel proud. She didn't feel like a hero. She just felt tired. But also free. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't carrying the weight of silence anymore. At school the next day, Imani passed Ashley by the lockers. Their eyes met briefly. No hostility. No fear. Just recognition. Later at lunch, Imani was surprised to see Ashley walking toward her table. The cafeteria grew quiet as everyone noticed. Ashley stopped in front of her. "I'm not asking to sit," she said. "I just wanted to say. I'm sorry." Imani looked up at her. "Okay." Ashley hesitated. "You don't have to accept it." "I didn't say I did," Imani replied calmly. "But I hear you." Ashley nodded slowly. Then turned and walked away. Imani didn't watch her leave. Instead, she looked around the cafeteria, at the students who had once laughed, who now watched her with a mix of admiration and curiosity. And she realized something important. She didn't need to win them over. She didn't need to become anything more than who she already was. She had stood her ground, not just against Ashley, but against a system of fear disguised as popularity. And in doing so, she had changed Brooklyn High, not with fists, but with grace, patience, and a quiet, unshakable core. That, she realized, was the real fight. And she had already won. By the time fall settled over Brooklyn High, with crisp leaves tumbling across the campus and a cool wind weaving through the courtyard, the atmosphere had noticeably changed. Imani Rivers had not only survived the chaos of her first weeks at school, she had altered the rhythm of the entire place. But she hadn't done it by shouting or leading some grand movement. She had done it by standing firm, by choosing silence over spectacle, and strength over showmanship. For a while, it seemed that the storm had passed. Students no longer mocked her. Some now nodded to her in the hallways, and a few even approached her in classes to ask for help or share a kind word. She didn't seek attention, but the respect she commanded was quiet and genuine. Even teachers, who had once looked past her like any other transfer student, began to see her in a new light, mature, grounded, dependable. But while most of the student body had moved on, or at least, adjusted, there were still those who had trouble letting go of the past. Not everyone saw Imani's silence as noble. Some saw it as defiance. And in a high school where hierarchy once meant everything, change wasn't always welcomed, especially not by those who felt their control slipping. One of those students was Luke Rodriguez. Unlike Ashley, who had withdrawn, and Zach, who had gone quiet after his public embarrassment, Luke had grown bitter. He blamed Imani for his fall from grace. Where once he thrived on stirring chaos from the shadows, now people whispered about his humiliating defeat behind the gym. His name was no longer associated with troublemaking charm, but with failure. And Luke didn't take kindly to becoming irrelevant. One Monday afternoon, as students filed into the cafeteria, a sudden loud clatter echoed from the far end. Heads turned. A tray had crashed to the floor, scattering food and drinks everywhere. At the center of it stood Ethan, a soft-spoken sophomore with glasses and braces, trembling slightly as Luke stood over him, smirking. "What's the matter?" Luke sneered. "Too clumsy to walk." Imani had just stepped into the cafeteria and immediately saw what was happening. The energy in the room shifted. Students looked back and forth, between Ethan, Luke, and then Imani. It was as if everyone silently waited for her reaction. Imani didn't hesitate. She walked across the cafeteria with slow, steady steps. Luke turned at the sound of her approach and straightened, his expression sharpening. "Here comes the hero," he muttered under his breath. Imani crouched down next to Ethan, who was trying to gather his scattered food with shaking hands. "You okay?" she asked gently. Ethan nodded, eyes wide. "Why yeah. I'm fine." She helped him pick up what she could, then stood to face Luke. "That wasn't necessary," she said plainly. Luke shrugged, feigning indifference. "Wasn't talking to you." "But you wanted me to see it," Imani replied, her tone still calm. "Just like last time." A few students around them froze, eyes widening. Luke's jaw tightened. "Careful," he said, his voice lowering. "Don't think you're untouchable just because you embarrassed me once." "I'm not trying to be untouchable," Imani said. "I'm trying to stop you from making someone else feel small." Again. Luke's mouth opened, but before he could speak, Mr. Reynolds, one of the cafeteria monitors, appeared. "Everything all right here?" Imani turned to him. "It's handled, sir." Mr. Reynolds gave Luke a long look, then nodded and walked away. Luke didn't say another word. He picked up his own tray and stalked off, but not before sending Imani a glare that promised he wasn't done. That night at home, Imani recounted the scene to her father. Marcus listened quietly, his arms crossed as he leaned against the kitchen counter. "Sounds like he's testing you," he said. "He wants me to react," Imani said. "He's hoping I'll mess up." Marcus nodded. "Because you embarrassed him. But it's not just him you're dealing with anymore. You've become something to people here, something bigger than a student who stood up for herself. You're a symbol now, Imani. That makes you a target." "I didn't ask to be," she said quietly. "No," he agreed, "but you became one because of who you are. Because you didn't back down. And now, People are watching to see if you'll keep being that person when it's inconvenient. When it's hard. Imani sat back in her chair, tired. I don't want to be a symbol. I just want to get through the year. Marcus walked over, set a hand on her shoulder. Then do that. On your terms. But remember, being silent doesn't mean being passive. And being strong doesn't mean being cruel. The next few days passed without incident. Luke kept his distance, though Imani could feel his gaze more than once in the hallways. She ignored it. Focused on her studies. On helping Jasmine with algebra. On mentoring Ethan after school once she found out he was trying to build confidence for a debate club tryout. But the peace wouldn't last. On Thursday, just before 7th period, flyers began appearing around the school. Slipped into lockers, taped to walls, even scattered across bathroom sinks. They were simple sheets of white paper, printed with a photo from the cafeteria fight weeks ago, Zach lying on the ground, Luke pinned, and Imani standing above them. Above the photo in bold black letters, it read, "Our new queen." Or just another bully hiding behind a smile. The effect was immediate. Students began whispering again, not about admiration, but suspicion. Had Imani really been as noble as everyone thought? Or was she just playing a game of power better than Ashley ever did? Imani found a copy taped to her locker. She stared at it in silence for several seconds before peeling it off. She didn't say a word. Didn't react. But inside, something twisted. It wasn't just an attack, it was a deliberate attempt to manipulate perception. To flip the story. She didn't have proof, but she didn't need it. She knew Luke was behind it. After school, she went straight to the gym, not the school gym, but her father's. The rhythm of gloves hitting punching bags welcomed her. Marcus looked up as she entered, saw the paper in her hand, and nodded toward the back room. "Show me," he said. They stood in the training space, mats laid out, the hum of the fan spinning overhead. Imani handed him the flyer. He read it, expressionless. "This is what happens when truth makes people uncomfortable," he said after a moment. They twisted. "I thought I was doing the right thing," Imani whispered. "You were. But not everyone wants the truth. Some people want their version of control back." Imani looked up. "What do I do?" Marcus stepped forward and met her eyes. "You don't fight it with fists. You fight it with who you are. You keep showing them that you're not a bully. You keep standing for the ones who can't stand for themselves. And when the truth settles, because it always does, you'll still be standing." The next morning, Imani came to school earlier than usual. She walked from hallway to hallway, taking down every flyer she could find. By the time first period started, the walls were clean. She didn't make a speech. Didn't demand justice. Instead, she kept being herself. She walked Jasmine to class when a group of seniors tried to corner her. She helped Ethan prep for his debate tryout. She stayed after class to help the biology teacher clean up lab stations. She didn't ask for credit. She just lived with quiet consistency. And the school noticed. By the end of the week, students began tearing down the flyers themselves. One even posted a message in the student group chat that read, "If standing up for yourself and others makes you a bully, maybe we all need to be more like Imani." Luke, seeing his plan fall apart, confronted Imani outside by the parking lot the following Monday. "You think you're better than everyone?" he snapped. "You think they like you? You're just another show." Imani turned, met his eyes without fear. "No, Luke. I think they see someone who won't back down just because someone like you tells them to." Luke opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He turned and walked away, his steps faster than before. Imani watched him go, then turned toward the setting sun behind the school, its orange glow washing over the lot. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt steady. She had been tested again. Not in a fight. but in reputation, character, and endurance. And once again, she had stood firm. Not with fists, but with who she was. And that, she knew, would always be enough. The chill of late October had settled into Brooklyn High, bringing with it more than just falling leaves and the scent of sharpened pencils. There was a new tone in the air, one of change, uncertainty, and curiosity. Imani Rivers, once seen as the quiet girl from Chicago, had become the embodiment of quiet strength. But even strength, especially the kind built on silence and dignity, could only carry so much weight before the world demanded more. Rumors had begun to resurface, not about fights or cafeteria standoffs, but about who Imani truly was. Some students whispered that she had martial arts training, that she had once seriously hurt someone at her previous school. Others said she had been expelled and Brooklyn High was her second chance. The details were hazy, the sources unreliable, but the whispers grew louder. Even the teachers had started to glance at her a little differently, more cautiously than before. Imani noticed. Of course she did. She kept her head down as always, focused on her schoolwork, her few close interactions, and her after-school visits to her father's gym. But the way students paused their conversations when she walked by, or how teachers hesitated a moment too long when calling on her, it all told her one thing: someone was digging into her past. And she knew exactly who it was. Luke Rodriguez might have failed to undermine her publicly, but he was cunning. If he couldn't bring her down in front of the school, he'd do it quietly, behind the scenes. He had begun asking questions, talking to old contacts, even reaching out on social media to people connected to her former school in Chicago. All it took was one thread pulled the right way. It didn't take long for the rumor to escalate into something tangible. On a rainy Tuesday, during fifth period, Imani was called into the principal's office. She stepped inside, her heart steady, but her thoughts racing. Principal Harris sat at his desk, fingers steepled, his usual warm demeanor noticeably more formal. Beside him sat Vice Principal Donnelly, her expression unreadable. "Imani," Principal Harris began, motioning for her to sit. "We've received some concerning reports about an incident at your previous school. I want to stress, we're not making any assumptions. But we need to understand the full context." Imani didn't flinch. She met their eyes, calm as ever. "What do you want to know?" Principal Harris hesitated, then slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside were printed emails, screenshots of a few old social media posts, and a brief statement from a parent at her former school. "The report says you physically assaulted another student. Sent her to the hospital. Is that true?" Imani inhaled slowly. "It's true that there was a fight. But it wasn't an assault. I defended myself. Her name was Erica. She had been targeting me for months. One day she cornered me after school, and I reacted without thinking. I never meant to hurt her that badly." Vice Principal Donnelly spoke for the first time. "But she was hospitalized." "Yes," Imani said quietly. "And I've never stopped regretting that." There was a long silence. "I was suspended, not expelled," she added. "My father chose to move us because he thought I needed a fresh start. That's how we ended up here." Principal Harris tapped his pen against the desk. "Thank you for being honest, Imani. We'll be reviewing everything carefully. For now, there's no disciplinary action. But we may need to follow up." Imani nodded once. "Understood." As she left the office, she felt the weight of the past settle again on her shoulders, not as guilt, but as unfinished business. She had tried to bury it, to start over without dragging the baggage behind her. But now it was clear, if she wanted peace, she would have to confront it. That afternoon, back at the gym, she told her father everything. Marcus listened silently, a towel slung over his shoulder, sweat still clinging to his arms from his own training session. When she finished, he sighed deeply and sat beside her on the bench. "I always knew this might come up," he said. "But I wanted to believe people would see who you are now, not who you were. Imani nodded. It's not just about me anymore. Everyone's watching. They think I'm dangerous. Do you believe that? Marcus asked. No. But I think I'm tired of running from that moment. Marcus leaned back. Then maybe it's time you talk to someone else about it. Not just me. Not the principal. But the people who matter now. Imani frowned. What do you mean? I mean, maybe you need to own your story. Before someone else tells it for you. The idea unsettled her. Public speaking wasn't her style. But he was right. The truth had power, more power than any rumor. The next morning, Imani requested time during Friday's school assembly. The announcement came during homeroom and rippled through the school like wildfire. Imani Rivers, who barely spoke in class, who avoided drama and conflict, was going to speak publicly. Students exchanged confused glances. Some were skeptical, others intrigued. But by Friday morning, the gymnasium was packed. Students filled the bleachers, the floor buzzing with curiosity. Even the faculty took their seats early. The microphone sat at the edge of the stage, and when Imani stepped up to it, the room fell into an eerie silence. She stood in jeans and a plain gray hoodie, her hair pulled back, no makeup, no performance. Just her. I know some of you have heard rumors about me, she began. Her voice was soft, but steady. About my past. About what happened at my old school. So I want to tell you the truth. She paused. Took a breath. 2 years ago, I hurt someone. Not on purpose. But I hurt them. Her name was Erica, and for a long time, she made my life miserable. I kept quiet. I tried to ignore it. I believed that if I didn't fight back, it would stop. But it didn't. And one day, I snapped. Whispers started in the crowd, but she continued. I used everything my father taught me, martial arts, self-defense, but in that moment, I forgot the most important part, control. I didn't want to injure her. But I did. And it changed everything. Imani looked up, scanning the crowd. Since then, I've worked every day to never lose that control again. That's why I don't react to people like Luke. That's why I didn't fight back when Ashley pushed me, or when people whispered behind my back. Because I know what it's like to cross a line you can't uncross. The gym was dead silent now. Even the students who had once doubted her looked stunned. I'm not perfect, she said. But I'm not dangerous. And I'm not fake. I just want to live in peace. To be allowed to grow. Like all of you. She stepped back from the mic. No applause followed, only silence. Then, after a beat, a single clap. Then another. And slowly, a wave of clapping rippled across the gym until nearly everyone was on their feet. Some didn't clap. Some didn't stand. But enough did. Enough for Imani to feel something shift. Later that day, Ethan stopped her in the hallway. That was brave, he said. Thank you. Even Jasmine, who rarely spoke to anyone but Imani, squeezed her arm as they passed in the stairwell. Luke didn't speak to her again. Not that week. Not the next. Whatever he had tried to expose had only made her stronger. But the most surprising moment came from Ashley Mitchell. On Monday morning, Imani found a folded note in her locker. Inside, written in neat, cursive letters, were 5 words. I believe you. Thank you. There was no signature. But she didn't need one. Imani folded the note and tucked it into her backpack. It didn't erase the past, but it reminded her that the past didn't define her. How she chose to face it, that's what mattered. And she had chosen to stand. Again. Not with fists. But with truth. The first snowfall of the season came early that year, blanketing Brooklyn High's worn brick exterior in a layer of soft white. Students trudged through the slush-covered sidewalks, wrapped in hoodies and jackets, their breath visible in the chilled morning air. Inside, however, a warmth had begun to grow, one that was difficult to explain but easy to feel. Imani Rivers had become something of an enigma. She didn't court popularity, but somehow earned it. She didn't try to be a leader, yet people started following her example. What had begun as resistance, a quiet refusal to be intimidated, had transformed into quiet influence. Her speech at the assembly had broken through a barrier that many students didn't realize they had put up. For some, it was the first time they saw vulnerability as strength. For others, it was a reminder that the past didn't have to dictate the future. Still, for Imani, things hadn't exactly settled. She had earned respect, yes. But respect wasn't the same as peace. Some students now approached her daily, asking for advice, trying to sit with her at lunch, or even trying to open up about their own troubles. And while she listened kindly, she often felt overwhelmed by the responsibility. She had come to Brooklyn High hoping to stay invisible. Now, she was anything but. And then there was Ashley. Since slipping that anonymous note into Imani's locker, Ashley had said nothing. She no longer walked through the halls with her former entourage. Brianna and Courtney now kept their distance, hesitant and unsure. Zach had retreated further into the background, avoiding eye contact when he passed Imani in the halls. And Luke, well, no one had seen much of Luke since the failed smear campaign. Rumor had it he was spending time in the counselor's office, working through things. Ashley, once queen of Brooklyn High, now walked the halls like a shadow of her former self. One Wednesday afternoon, as the school buzzed with the energy of an upcoming winter dance, Imani spotted Ashley alone in the library, sitting in the corner with a book open but untouched. Her eyes were distant, unfocused, and her posture was slumped, not the Ashley Mitchell anyone remembered. Imani hesitated. She had every reason to ignore her, to walk past and feel vindicated. But she didn't. She walked over, slowly and deliberately, and stood in front of the table. Ashley looked up, startled. "Oh, hey." Imani pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. She said nothing for a moment. "I got your note," she said finally. Ashley's lips tightened. She looked away. "I didn't think you'd say anything." "I almost didn't," Imani replied. "But I figured if you had the courage to write it, I could find the courage to respond." Ashley's eyes flicked up, wary, uncertain. "I meant it," she said quietly. "I didn't know how else to say it. I'm not good at apologizing." Imani folded her arms on the table. "That wasn't an apology." Ashley let out a breath, half laugh, half sigh. "No. I guess it wasn't." There was a long silence between them, filled only by the soft ticking of the library clock and the muffled sound of pages turning at nearby tables. "I ruined a lot of things," Ashley said. "Not just for you. For everyone. I thought I was in control, but I was just scared. Of being irrelevant. Of being nobody." Imani's expression didn't change. "Hurting people doesn't keep you relevant. It just makes you dangerous. I know that now." Another pause. "I don't expect forgiveness," Ashley said. "But I needed you to know, you were right. About everything." Imani studied her for a long moment. "I don't think you're a bad person, Ashley," she said slowly. "But I think you forgot what it means to be a good one." Ashley blinked. The words stung, but they were fair. Then, to both their surprise, Imani stood up and offered her hand. Ashley stared at it, uncertain, then slowly reached out and shook it. That moment, though simple, began a slow shift that rippled through the school once again. The next week, Ashley joined the student volunteer group that cleaned and decorated the gym for the winter dance. She didn't make announcements or take charge. She swept floors, hung paper snowflakes, and brought coffee to the kids setting up sound equipment. And little by little, people began to accept her presence again, not as a leader, but as someone trying to rebuild. Imani continued on her path. She spent time helping Jasmine tutor other students, joined a peer mediation program, and even led a self-defense workshop at the community center with her father's support. At first, she didn't want to be the face of anything, but the moment she started teaching, she realized that sharing her strength didn't mean giving it away. It meant multiplying it. On the day of the winter dance, snow fell steadily, blanketing the roads and trees in white. The gym was transformed with strings of lights, soft music, and the glow of lanterns hung from the rafters. Students arrived in coats and boots, laughter in the air, the smell of hot cocoa floating through the halls. Imani stood near the edge of the gym floor, a cup of cider in hand, watching as Jasmine danced with Ethan, both laughing awkwardly and stepping on each other's feet. It was endearing. Then, Ashley approached. She wore a simple navy dress, hair pulled back, no entourage behind her. Just herself. "I'm not here to make a scene," Ashley said quickly. "I just wanted to say, thank you for giving me the chance to figure things out." Imani offered a small smile. "We're all figuring things out." They stood in silence for a moment, watching students dance. "Do you ever think about going back?" Ashley asked. "To who you were before, everything?" Imani took a sip of her cider. "Sometimes. But then I remember, I didn't lose myself. I found who I really was." Ashley nodded, quiet. "I hope I can do that too," she said softly. "You can," Imani replied. "But you have to stop chasing who you used to be." As the music shifted to a slower song, the dance floor grew fuller. Jasmine waved at Imani from across the gym, signaling for her to join. Imani laughed and shook her head. "Maybe next song," she mouthed. Ashley chuckled. "She's not going to give up." "No, she won't." As the night wore on, something about the atmosphere felt lighter than it had in months. For the first time in a long while, there was no tension in the air. Just students, young, flawed, hopeful, trying to make something beautiful out of a difficult year. Later that night, Imani walked home with her father. The snow crunched beneath their boots as they moved along the quiet sidewalk. "How was the dance?" Marcus asked. "Good," Imani said. "Really good." He glanced over. "You seem lighter." "I am," she said. "Not because things are perfect. But because I stopped waiting for them to be." He smiled. "That's my girl." As they approached their house, Imani paused and looked up at the sky, where snowflakes drifted down under the streetlight like pieces of glass. "I used to think strength meant never bending," she said. Marcus looked at her, waiting. "But now I think strength is knowing when to bend, without breaking. And knowing when to stand your ground." He nodded slowly. "That's something most adults haven't even figured out." Imani smiled. She didn't need applause, or power, or recognition. What she had now was something far more valuable. Peace. Dignity. And a deep-rooted strength that no rumor, no bully, no past mistake could take from her. As they walked inside, the warmth of their home wrapped around her like a blanket. She was no longer surviving Brooklyn High. She was thriving. On her terms. The new semester began under a crisp winter sun, its pale light casting long shadows over the snow-streaked sidewalks of Brooklyn High. The bitter chill had not yet loosened its grip on the city, but inside the school, something had thawed. Students moved through the halls with a different kind of energy, less guarded, more open. At the center of this quiet transformation was Imani Rivers. Her name, once whispered with skepticism and fear, now carried a different weight, respect, admiration, even hope. What she had endured, how she had stood her ground with grace and strength, had left an impression deeper than any lesson taught in a textbook. But while others saw her as a symbol of resilience, Imani remained grounded. She wasn't interested in titles or attention. Her goal was the same as it had always been, to finish her senior year, quietly and with dignity. But life had other plans. It started with a flyer taped to the main bulletin board, an invitation to join the Student Leadership Council. It was a program supported by the district and offered students the chance to represent their school in citywide forums, working on initiatives from anti-bullying campaigns to academic equity. Imani passed by it several times without stopping, barely sparing it a glance. Until Jasmine blocked her path. "Don't pretend you didn't see it," Jasmine said, arms crossed. "You need to apply." Imani shook her head. "That's not my thing." "Actually, it's exactly your thing," Jasmine countered. "You don't have to give speeches or play politics. They need someone like you, someone who's lived it. Someone who can lead by example." Imani hesitated. The idea of putting herself in any kind of spotlight still made her uneasy. But Jasmine wasn't wrong. There was value in what she had experienced. And maybe, just maybe, she could do more than survive this place, maybe she could help reshape it. 3 weeks later, Imani stood at a podium in the school auditorium, delivering a short presentation to the council selection panel. Her voice was steady, her words clear. She spoke not about rules or reform, but about dignity, understanding, and the simple human need to feel safe and seen. By the end of the week, she was elected unanimously as Brooklyn High's representative. The news spread quickly, and while most students celebrated her appointment, not everyone was pleased. In a corner booth at a local diner, 2 students sat hunched over milkshakes and fries. Brianna and Luke. "I'm telling you," Luke muttered, stabbing a fry into a blob of ketchup. "This whole Imani thing is out of control. She acts like she doesn't want power, but she's running this school now." "She's not running anything," Brianna said, though her voice lacked conviction. "People just like her." Luke scoffed. "She's playing everyone. And no one's calling her out. Not even Ashley." Brianna frowned. "Ashley's not the same anymore." Luke leaned back, folding his arms. "Exactly. That's the problem." Luke didn't like change, especially when it wasn't on his terms. Watching Imani quietly dismantle the social order he'd thrived and made his skin crawl. He wanted to push back. He needed to. And he wasn't the only one. Around the same time, an anonymous Instagram account appeared, Brooklyn Unfiltered. At first, it posted harmless memes and inside jokes about school life. But soon, it began to target students directly. Blurry photos, screenshots, rumors disguised as tea. And then, one morning, a post about Imani. It was a cropped photo of her walking with Ethan and Jasmine, laughing. The caption read, "Funny how the silent girl suddenly became queen. Guess all you need is a sob story and a black belt." The comments were worse. At first, Imani brushed it off. But then it escalated. More posts. Accusations. Misquotes. Speculation about her past in Chicago. A screenshot of her disciplinary report, somehow leaked. She sat in the front office one morning, her jaw tight, as Principal Harris handed her a printed copy of the post. "I want you to know we're investigating this," he said. "This kind of targeted harassment violates everything we stand for." Imani nodded, but said nothing. Outside, whispers had returned. Different this time, not fear, but gossip. Prying curiosity. Was it true she had been in juvie? Had she put a girl in a coma? The rumors spun faster than she could keep up. And just like that, the old feeling crept back in. That sense of being watched, judged, misunderstood. Marcus noticed it first. One night, over dinner, he asked, "What's eating at you, kid?" Imani put down her fork. "I don't know how to stop it. It's like, no matter what I do, someone finds a way to twist it." Her father leaned forward. "That's because power makes people uncomfortable. Especially when it comes from a place they don't expect." "I didn't ask for power." "No," he said. But you earned influence. That's harder. And scarier, for people like Luke. Imani nodded slowly. What do I do? She asked. You keep being you, Marcus said. You don't fight rumors with fists. You fight them with truth. With consistency. That's what wins in the end. The next day, Imani requested time at the Friday assembly, again. She stood on stage in front of the school, not with fire, but with clarity. I know there's been a lot of talk, she said. Some of it is true. Some of it's twisted. But I'm not here to defend my past. I've already done that. I'm here to talk about what's next. She looked out at the crowd. We say we want change. We say we want kindness. But the moment someone stands up and actually shows what that looks like, we tear them down. Why? A murmur spread through the audience. Imani's voice remained calm. You don't have to like me. You don't even have to believe in me. But if you care about this school becoming a better place, then ask yourself, what are you doing to help that happen? She stepped back. No dramatic exit. No mic drop. Just honesty. After the assembly, things didn't magically improve, but the tone shifted again. Students started defending Imani in the comments. Teachers spoke openly about digital responsibility. Even Ethan created a counterpage called Brooklyn Elevated, posting student achievements, artwork, and acts of kindness. Then came the real breakthrough. An anonymous tip led the school IT department to trace the original account to Luke's school-issued tablet. He was suspended immediately, and ordered to attend counseling sessions as part of his return agreement. It wasn't about punishment, it was about accountability. The incident sent a clear message: character mattered more than clout. In the weeks that followed, Imani continued her work with the Student Leadership Council, helping draft a new school-wide initiative that included restorative justice circles, peer-led anti-bullying workshops, and monthly student forums. And for the first time in a long while, Brooklyn High didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like a community learning how to heal. On a quiet afternoon, as the first signs of spring peeked through the bare trees, Imani stood in the courtyard with Jasmine and Ethan. Students passed by, laughing, tossing a football, waving hello. No whispers. No fear. You ever think about running for class president? Ethan joked. Imani rolled her eyes. Don't push it. Jasmine laughed. Okay, but if you ever do, we've got your campaign covered. Imani smiled. She didn't need a title. She didn't need approval. What she had now was enough. And for the first time since stepping into those cold hallways of Brooklyn High, she felt something rare. She felt free. As the final months of senior year unfolded, the air at Brooklyn High grew lighter, almost hopeful. Spring had arrived in full bloom, bringing with it longer days, laughter in the courtyard, and seniors buzzing with excitement about prom, college decisions, and what lay beyond these familiar walls. Imani Rivers walked those halls with a quiet sense of completion. She had earned the trust and respect of her peers, not by force or popularity contests, but through unwavering grace and resilience. Her past had once been whispered about in corners. Now, it was acknowledged with pride, a testament to how far someone could come without losing their soul along the way. But Imani hadn't just survived Brooklyn High. She had changed it. Her work on the Student Leadership Council had led to real, tangible results. The school's new peer-led conflict resolution circles were now a staple in weekly advisory periods. Teachers reported less classroom tension, fewer incidents of bullying, and more student engagement in conversations about empathy, equity, and mutual respect. And yet, Imani remained humble. One Friday afternoon, while helping clean up after a school-wide culture fair, she found herself standing beside a girl from the freshman class. Her name was Talia, small and soft-spoken, with thick glasses and a sketchbook she carried like armor. "You're Imani Rivers, right?" Talia asked shyly, her voice barely louder than a whisper. Imani nodded with a warm smile. That's me. Talia hesitated, then said, I saw your assembly speech back in the fall. And the way you handled everything. It gave me the courage to stop eating lunch in the bathroom. Imani blinked, surprised by the honesty of the confession. Her heart softened. Thank you, she said sincerely. That means a lot. Talia looked relieved, even joyful. I just wanted you to know. You made this place feel a little safer. Those small moments were what mattered most to Imani. Not the accolades. Not the recognition. But the quiet confirmation that her courage had created space for others to find theirs. Meanwhile, Ashley Mitchell had been walking her own road, quieter, lonelier, but no less important. After the incident that had shattered her social throne, Ashley spent weeks in reflection. She saw the fragments of who she used to be, and for the first time, she questioned why she had ever been so hungry for power. With no followers to impress, no image to protect, Ashley started to reconnect with herself. She began volunteering at a local youth center on Saturdays, tutoring kids in math and organizing weekend art workshops. It wasn't public. It wasn't glamorous. But it was real. One day in late April, Imani and Ashley crossed paths in the teacher's lounge while delivering materials for an upcoming assembly. For a brief moment, both paused, the memory of their turbulent past hanging between them. Ashley was the first to speak. Hey. Imani gave a small nod. Hey. There was an awkward pause before Ashley added, You look happy. I am, Imani replied honestly. Are you? Ashley hesitated, then nodded. Getting there. Imani offered a faint smile. That's good. They didn't talk much after that, but the exchange was enough. A subtle acknowledgement that both of them had grown. That neither of them had to carry the weight of who they used to be. As May rolled in, Brooklyn High prepared for one of its biggest events of the year, Senior Recognition Day. Students were nominated for awards across various categories: academic excellence, community leadership, artistic achievement, athletic spirit. No one was surprised when Imani's name appeared under the Heart of Brooklyn Award, a newly created honor recognizing a student who had made a lasting impact on the school community through strength, compassion, and leadership. At first, she tried to decline the nomination. I didn't do any of this for awards, she told Principal Harris. I know, he replied. That's exactly why you deserve it. When the day came, the gym was packed. Teachers, parents, and students filled the bleachers, cheering for each winner. Imani sat quietly in the front row, her father Marcus beaming beside her in a crisp navy suit. When her name was called, the applause was thunderous. She stepped onto the stage, unsure of what to say. But as she looked out into the crowd, at Jasmine grinning with pride, Ethan giving her a thumbs up, even Ashley clapping softly from the back row, she felt calm. I didn't expect this, she began. To be honest, I didn't expect a lot when I first walked into this school. I came here hoping to disappear. Hoping to just make it to graduation without anyone noticing me. She paused, letting that truth sink in. But that didn't happen. Instead, I was noticed. For better and for worse. And it was hard. Really hard. But every challenge, every rumor, every pushback, I used it to build something stronger inside me. The room was silent, hanging on every word. I learned that being quiet doesn't mean being weak. That standing your ground doesn't mean fighting. That changing a school doesn't take noise, it takes consistency. It takes compassion. It takes one person deciding they've had enough, and being willing to take the first step towards something better. She looked at Marcus, her voice softening. My dad always told me, you don't start the fight, but you better be ready to finish it. I used to think that meant swinging fists. Now I know it means protecting your peace, your values, your dignity. She smiled. Thank you for letting me be part of this school. And thank you for proving that change really is possible, one step, one student at a time. The applause returned, even louder this time, rising to its feet. That afternoon, as the ceremony ended and students spilled out into the warm spring sun, Imani stood with her father on the front steps of Brooklyn High. "You did good, kid," Marcus said, his voice gruff with pride. Imani leaned against him. "I think we both did." He smiled. "You ready for what's next?" She nodded. "I am." Over the next few weeks, the school year wound down. Imani received her acceptance letter to Howard University, where she planned to study psychology and education. Jasmine would be attending NYU, majoring in political science. Ethan had committed to a small liberal arts college in Vermont, focusing on community development. And as for Ashley, she surprised everyone by writing an op-ed for the school newspaper titled, "What I Learned When I Lost Everything." In it, she owned up to her past mistakes and spoke honestly about redemption, shame, and the slow process of rebuilding self-worth. "I used to think power meant being untouchable," she wrote. "Now I know real strength is being able to look at yourself in the mirror and not flinch." It struck a chord with the student body, and even teachers sent her letters of encouragement. No one expected perfection. But everyone respected honesty. On the last day of school, Imani stood at the edge of the senior lawn with Jasmine, Ethan, and a few other friends, watching the younger students file out, excited for summer. "You think they'll remember any of this?" Ethan asked, gesturing toward the school. Imani looked around, eyes resting briefly on the familiar walls, the lockers, the courtyard where she'd once sat alone. "Maybe not everything," she said. "But they'll remember how it felt. What it meant." She paused. "And maybe they'll remember that it's okay to stand up, even if your voice shakes." As the bell rang one final time, the students of Brooklyn High poured into the streets, arms raised, voices cheering. And Imani Rivers walked calmly into the sunlight, head high, heart open, ready to face the world beyond those doors. She had weathered storms, overcome judgment, fought for justice, not with fists, but with unwavering truth. And in doing so, she had not only rewritten her own story. She had helped an entire school believe in the power of becoming better. In life, true strength isn't found in dominance or control, it's found in restraint, in knowing when to speak up and when to walk away. Imani Rivers taught us that courage doesn't always roar, sometimes, it's quiet, steady, and unshakable. Her story reminds us that you don't have to become who the world expects, you can choose who you are, even in the face of cruelty and misunderstanding. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is stand tall, even when your voice is trembling. If this story touched something in you, I'd love to hear what it meant. Please leave a comment below, we read every one. And if you believe stories like Imani's deserve to be heard, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep sharing the stories that matter, the ones that stay with you long after the screen fades to black.